welcome to the Legislative Council agenda at 1814. Moving on to item 2. Sorry, my computer's being slow. All right, the SMU acknowledges that McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples. The SMU recognizes and respects these nations as the traditional custodians of the land on water on which it is located. Moving on to item 3, attendance. When I reach your name, please say here, present, or any other variation. We have no proxies tonight. Wing, I did get some emails for attendance instead of the form, so I'll just let you know when we hit that spot. So we'll begin with Councillor Collins, Arts.
Present.
Councillor Karasik, Arts.
Present.
Councillor Smith, Arts.
Present, Madame la Présidente.
Councillor Williamson, Arts.
Present.
Councillor Litvina, Arts and Science.
Present.
Councillor Mulvaney, Athletics.
Present.
Councillor Awan, Clubs.
Present.
Councillor Lee, Dentistry. Okay. Councillor Bullhose, Education will be late. Councillor Kirksu. Councillor Reed will also be late. Councillor Page, First Year Council. Councillor Bonin, Law.
Present.
Councillor Gunderman, Management.
Present.
Councillor Coonson, Management.
Present.
Councillor Wan, Medicine.
Present.
Councillor Kodadati, Music.
Present.
Councillor G, Nursing.
Present.
Councillor Morgan, PTOT. Councillor Fernandez, Science.
Present.
Councillor Sood, Science.
Present, sorry.
Councillor Zhang, Science.
Present.
Senator Daryanani.
Present.
Senator Parsons.
Present.
Councillor Morali, Services.
Present.
On the agenda for new business, there is no business arising this evening. For this evening presentations, we have 3. We have Divest, McGill, Metro, Boycott, Students for Peace and Disarmament, and Must Buzz. As usual, please ensure you remain respectful towards the presenters at all times. And once again, in steering committee innovations, in order to ensure fruitful debate, we will be limiting the number of times an individual may speak on a certain motion at a given time. Please note that regardless of how long an individual's name may be placed on the speaking list / their hand has been raised, we are encouraging involvement from all councillors and members of the gallery present at this evening's Legislative Council. And as usual, comments, questions, and suggestions are always welcome and appreciated, and they may be sent to my email at speaker@smu.ca. Lastly, there will be no confidential session this evening. Are there any individuals with questions on the report of the steering committee? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe there's a contradiction in the report versus the agenda. I'm given to understand there is confidential business tonight.
Yes, there is.
Okay, yeah, my apologies then. We'll just note that. We'll note that correction in the for the record. Are there any other individuals wishing to have any questions? Hearing none, we will move on. We will move on to item 7, guest speakers. So we have, as I said, we have 3, and we will begin with Divest, McGill, Metro, Boycott. The individuals there, the individual is present to speak on this. We do have a parliamentarian that will be projecting your presentation for everyone. So whenever you need us to go to the next slide, you can just say clear, like just indicate so, and our parliamentarian will do so. But without further ado, you may take the floor. Before beginning your presentation, I'll just ask you to state your name and spell your name, as well as your personal pronouns for the purpose of the minutes.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Speaker. I am one of the members of Divest McGill here. I believe Sophia is also here or is coming soon. My name is Samuel Elguero. As you can see my name, it's spelled right below my little interface there. I use he, him pronouns, and I am on Jojage territory right now. I'm going to, I didn't know we'd only be given 10 minutes, so I'm going to really flow through these slides right now. So if we can just stay on this first slide for a bit, and then we'll skip a couple slides.
Sorry, Samuel, if you need more time, you can just indicate so, and we'll get a motion to extend your time.
Oh, it's no problem. It's really no problem. We can fit it into 10 minutes. I think it would be best for everyone too. So I would like to just cover some very basic things. If we can just go through the idea and the philosophy of the boycott first, I think that would be awesome. And then I'm going to extend it to my comrade Sophia. She's going to really elaborate on everything I'm going to discuss right now. So essentially, Divest McGill is engaging in a boycott of Metro right now over its dissatisfaction of the Board of Governors' inability to pass a motion to drop all of its fossil fuel investments in the fossil fuel industry. On the Board of Governors sits as Vice Chair Maryse Bertrand, who also earns a retainer of $120,000 and $500,000 in shares on the corporate board of Metro Inc. So director at Metro, vice chair at McGill. We are attempting to target through this boycott of Metro Inc. The financial and professional interests of Maryse Bertrand to pressure her into supporting divestment at the university. I should say, in researching this campaign, I was really astonished by the kind of corporation that Metro Inc. is, totally unrelated from Maryse Bertrand's role at McGill University in promoting investments in the fossil fuel industry. Metro Inc. is a mega corporation, not just owning the 300 plus Metro namesake stores across Ontario and Quebec, but it also owns 400 Junket stores. It also owns Adonis. It owns Première Moisson. It owns Super C and a wealth of other stores like Food Basics in Ontario. They are a member of Canada's, I believe, 3 or 4 major players in the grocery store industry and convenience store industry, making them a member of a huge oligopoly. In June of this year, Metro coordinated with other companies in conducting on June 11th and June 12th a wage cut to its workers that was coordinated with other members of the grocery store industry. Right as the pandemic was underway, they cut their workers' pay by about $2, I believe. And just as many of their workers were catching COVID. Okay, I think Sophia is still coming. In that case, I will skip to, can we skip to slide 8, I believe? Just 2 slides back, please. Yeah, excellent. So as you can see here, we have charted out for everyone here the connection between McGill and Metro. To make it very obvious, McGill 2019 had about $50 million invested in the oil and gas industry. You have Metro, Manners, etc. And connecting these two institutions is Maryse Bertrand. She earns $120,000 in annual salary at Metro, over $500,000 in shares, and she sits on their board of directors. And she's vice chair of the board of governors of McGill. We can go to the next slide. So one of the reasons we are doing this, and perhaps the primary reason we are doing this, is, so Sophia's attempting to get into the meeting, but she says the host has another meeting in process.
Okay,
I think you need to send a link to her as well.
Yeah, I'll resend the link.
Perfect, thank you.
So sorry, everyone. So yes. So one of the primary reasons we're doing this is to put financial and professional pressure on Mrs. Beltran, so that she can encourage divestment on the at the Board of Governors from McGill's about 50 million investments in the fossil fuel industry. We have about two situations that are possible from this boycott campaign. She can either reconsider her stance on McGill's investments, or she can step down from the Board of Governors. I think both would be very fruitful in terms of promoting divestment at the university, as both would show members of the Board of Governors that there are indeed consequences to investing in extremely disastrous industries such as the fossil fuel industry. We can go to the next slide. It's important to, I think, mention that Metro has one of the best, according to industry insiders, one of the highest ranked and the highest ranked in the grocery store industry brands in Canada. And so it is extremely valuable to them to not see that brand tainted. So one of the aims of this boycott campaign is to affect that brand in the public eyes. And that's indeed one of the reasons I'm here presenting this to you, because I think it's very important to get this boycott campaign to as many people as possible, and to be able to circulate information about the campaign to as many people as possible, and get as many work on in the future as in motion, sometime in January or even February, of support for the boycott. That would be very helpful in terms of interacting with the public and in terms of things that Smoo can offer for this campaign. Other things include marking interested on Divest McGill's Metro boycott Facebook events. I hope everyone here is a member and following Divest McGill's Facebook page, where you can stay updated on the motion through the Legislative Council. Divestment continues to be a very important issue. We can't have our university invest in one of the most dangerous industries ever known to mankind. And so if you can follow us on Facebook, if you can keep updated on our events, that would be really awesome. Just marking interested, even if you don't plan on attending events we have scheduled, that would be excellent. And for all other purposes, if you'd like to get involved as an organizer, if you'd like to start attending our pickets, which we schedule weekly in front of Metro namesake stores, you can fill out the Google form linked at the bottom here. Speaker, will this be put in the chat, a link to the slides?
The slides are linked in our shared Legislative Council drive, so all councillors have a copy.
Excellent, excellent. So with that, we can just head to 2 slides later, and I'll finish up on our presentation. I would just like to, I would like all of you, just 1 slide further, please. Yeah, just another slide further. Thank you so much. It would be great if all of you can attend, if all of you can show both public and private support for our Metro boycott. It would certainly help in furthering the sustainability goals of the Legislative Council. Thank you very much.
Other grocery stores or those that are not problematic. The list is pretty comprehensive with the ones that are problematic, and it's hard to even assume that other grocery stores near us are not problematic. So I was just wondering whether there would be like a more positive side of the campaign to encourage change and make it convenient, given especially timings are changing because of COVID, and grocery stores are already limited. They're very essential yet difficult to access.
That is an excellent question. If I can respond to it. At the pickets that we do, it's very hard. If you go 1 slide back, Mrs. Speaker, we often hand out something to the effect of this that shows local grocery stores surrounding the specific metro we are picketing, asking people to shop locally especially. So we mark which stores are local and showing alternatives to Metro. I think it's definitely true that, for example, you have here Provigo as an alternative. I think it's definitely true that there are many problematic aspects with Provigo. I mean, Provigo coordinated with Metro in the wage cut that was applied to workers back in June. And of course, it's a mega industry and one of the major players in an oligopoly in Canada over the grocery store industry. That said, the main point of this campaign is not just to target Metro for its practices as you know, a monolithic corporation engaging in oligopolistic practices, but it is also to target it for its role in financing and promoting the professional interests of a member of the Board of Governors who has voted against divestment, and who is also a very prominent member of the Board of Governors, nonetheless. And so I suppose the response to your question is twofold. Number one, we certainly do promote alternatives at the pickets we do. But it's always context specific, of course. Like you live in Milton Park. I mean, there's a variety of independent grocery stores surrounding you. And there are also other grocery stores other than Metro. So we definitely do try to promote those to people. And at the moment, we have a working group that is conducting research around specific metros we are picketing, looking at prices of local grocery stores and even of other grocery chains, and comparing them to Metro's prices, just so that there's incentive that's economic for people not to shop at Metro. And of course, the second part to your question is why Metro other than other chains like Provigo or Maxi? And it's because, you have to start somewhere, of course. And perhaps what we do to Metro will encourage Provigo and Maxi to change their practices otherwise. And this is a McGill campaign focused on a member of their board of directors who does not sit on other grocery stores like Provigo or Maxi. I hope that answers at least most of your question.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other individuals with questions at this time? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Sam and Sophia, for coming tonight. With that, we'll move on to our second presentation, and it's item 7B, Students for Peace and Disarmament. We'll just get that presentation, and as was stated with the last one, just before presenting, please just spell your name for the purpose of the minutes, and note that the 10 minutes is a guideline. If you go over it, we can ask a counselor will motion for an extension on your time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My name is Maya Garfinkel, MAYAGARFINKEL, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to be one of the folks presenting with SPD today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nika Hansel, ANIKAHUNDAL. I'm also a member of SPD going to be presenting today, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Holla, LIA space HOLLA. And I'm also going to be presenting with SPD today and use she, her pronouns. Welcome to Disarmament 101. We are super excited to be presenting to the Legislative Council today. This has been boiled down from a 2-hour workshop to a 10 to 20-minute workshop that is meant to give you some contextual background on the harmful impact of the military-industrial complex. Additionally, as the title might suggest, an introduction to the concept of disarmament and what that might look like in the near future internationally, nationally, and in our community here at McGill. The purpose of this presentation is to give you the same context that has informed a disarmament policy that will be brought forth in the near future to Legislative Council. We'd like to begin by posing the question, how much money do you think goes towards militarism annually now? Feel free to unmute yourself or just pop it in the chat. Do you have any guesses?
Just to clarify, do you mean like at McGill or just like globally?
Globally. Like one person's once guessed 400. Like you feel free to guess, and if not, that's okay. We can just tell you the answer. You all have the slides.
Is it in the trillions?
Okay.
Or the billions?
Great guess. It's next slide. Global military spending has reached a new post-Cold War high, topping $1.9 trillion. To contextualize what $1 trillion looks like, we put every single zero there and a list of what $1 trillion could do. It's worth noting that this list is cumulative, so all of these things could be done with $1 trillion, not just one of them. Next slide, please. We believe that a crisis as the COVID-19 pandemic could and should be addressed by supporting healthcare and other life-sustaining activities, not equipment and personnel prepared for war. Divesting from war is a call to radically reevaluating our priorities and standing up to those who are holding hostage our ability to invest in education, sustainable development, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, and facing intrinsic inequalities in our society. We can rebuild our nation without a war economy and dilute the power of those who are only investing in war. Put up your hand if you have your either on Zoom or your actual hand if you've heard of the word military industrial complex. Okay, a couple hands. The word has a lot of different definitions, but to make sure we're all on the same page before moving on to talk about McGill's connection with the military contractors and the Canadian National Department of Defense, we're going to give a definition set forth by Students for Peace and Disarmament. The military-industrial complex is a network of... Oh, next slide, please. Thank you. One more, actually. Perfect. The military-industrial complex is a network of individuals and institutions involved in the production of weapons and military technologies. It involves the companies and sectors of government that fund research technologies used in warfare, as well as the universities, such as McGill, and other private businesses that accept the funding and create these technologies, the companies and manufacturers that sell the technologies, the lobbyists who advocate for governments to increase their military budgets and buy the technologies, and finally, the governments and militaries that use those technologies in warfare or otherwise. And also, then those weapons, some people include in the definition, then those weapons are often cycled back into other wars or fall into the gray or black weapon market. Next slide, please. So military and technology have had an extremely intertwined relationship over the past 50 years, a lot of which has led to catastrophic humanitarian consequences. But it's also important to note that technological advancement that are now that has led to crucial parts of what we use in society many of them have started as military projects, like listed here. Next slide, please. So we've discussed militarism in general and how it relates to manufacturing technology, but to narrow our scope into how this directly affects McGill and SMU, we're going to begin our discussion on what constitutes harmful military research. SPD, as you can read here, defines harmful military research as a systematic investigation of scientific knowledge with the purpose of improving existing or future endeavors that contribute to violence, whether indirectly or directly, against individual groups and environments. The aforementioned list on the last slide of technologies was like from internet to duct tape, wasn't created for the betterment of society or for the purpose of advancing innovation or bringing forward humankind in general, but rather was created with violent goals. And it's these goals that SPD is fundamentally opposed to. And context for that, a lot of those technologies were created during the Cold War for espionage purposes. Additionally, this technology disproportionately negatively affects low-income communities as well as indigenous communities. Next slide, please. An perfect example of what we constitute as a harmful technology is nuclear weapons. This technology was researched by many universities, forefront of science, in the States throughout the 1940s. In the Manhattan Project, you may have heard of. Their testing, development, and sale has led to catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences and has disproportionately impacted indigenous communities. An example of this is Soviet Union nuclear testing on indigenous communities in Kazakhstan. Individuals from these communities were brought under misleading context, were brought to sites of the sites where nuclear weapons were tested, and then at different distances from where the nuclear weapons were detonated, and then afterwards brought back into medical labs. They were treated like the indigenous communities through the 70s were treated as human guinea pigs to learn more about nuclear weapons. I'm sorry if I should have given a content warning. This example is graphic. However, part of what SPD does is we believe that looking at these weapons should be done through a humanitarian lens. So just to give you background on the reason I'm explaining this case study. Also, this case study is not just an anomaly. There is a repeated history and many, many case studies of Indigenous communities being disproportionately affected by the military-industrial complex. Similar case studies of the U.S. conducting testing on Indigenous communities in the Marshall Islands, as well as a modern day case study here in Canada, is seeing how the military. How specifically the nuclear weapon industry disproportionately affects Indigenous communities in northern Saskatchewan by the uranium mines. Next slide, please. Oh, one more.
Okay, thank you for that, Leah. Now we're going to move into talking about Canadian militarism more specifically. So contrary to popular belief, Canada does have a very harmful impact on militarism globally. It's not just the United States. We also have a large impact. So Canada currently is actually making a bid to acquire new fighter jets, an acquisition which will cost $19 billion. And if you can just move on to the next slide, please. So companies will compete to sell Canada their fighter jet. Lockheed Martin is projected to win. Now, this seems like a questionable purchase, at least to me, amidst a global pandemic. With an operating cost of $55,000 an hour, these fighters are much too costly when Canada is not at war and should not be prepping for a future war that we could avoid. The carbon emissions from these jets also far exceeds what we need to meet our commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, as each jet emits more carbon in a singular long-range flight than a regular car does in a full year. Many have been protesting and pushing for the government to reinvest this money in social services, pandemic relief, and healthcare, but there's been no response from government officials. Next slide, please. So here you can see a graph that is for the fiscal year 2015-2016 of Canadian government spending. So in green, we have government spending nationally on Environment Canada. In blue, we have overseas development assistance, which is foreign aid and aid to developing countries. And then in red, which encompasses blue and green together and far more, is our national defense budget, which obviously is much larger than both of the two. Next slide, please. So in terms of Canada's military's effect on instability in the Middle East, Operation Impact began as an effort to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria and has included many bombings by the Canadian Air Forces in 2014, 2016, many of which resulted in civilian casualties. Furthermore, many academics have noted Canada's role in contributing to the instability of the region through their military actions. Additionally, for this project, there are no reports on the carbon emissions or environmental impact. This is because the UN report each country is required to make excludes any fuel purchased and used overseas by the military. As many militaries have confidentiality clauses, it is hard to know the actual environmental impact of our military. This is especially important considering the US military is the biggest user of petroleum in the world. A US congressional report in 2012 said that the Department of Defense consumed about 117 million barrels of oil in 2011, only a little less than all of the petrol and diesel used in all of the cars in Britain in the same year. Next slide, please. So when talking about this, we're going to go more specifically into McGill's role in harmful military research and how we directly are tied to the military-industrial complex. So here it's important to note that this is not simply a problem of McGill and McGill profs and their research, but rather it is a systemic problem of funding and what is known as the military-industrial complex. McGill works with military contractors and the Canadian National Department of Defense, and their research eventually results in harmful military technology. Also worth noting that the military-industrial complex in the US and Canada typically attempts to lobby political support for continued or increased military spending and profit off of warfare. So what that means is that actually a lot of our research labs at McGill are actually run by military interests. And so at least SPD believes that a truly innovative university in Canada, especially McGill, should be looking toward research opportunities that are approved by students and that students deem innovative and are interested in because we're the ones doing the research. Next slide, please.
All right, now we are going to be delving into two labs in particular at McGill that conduct research that we believe falls under the umbrella of harmful military research. First, we are going to be delving into the Shockwave Physics Lab, McGill's longest standing military lab in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. The basic principle of the lab is to study the sharp changes of pressure in the air resulting in and from explosions. Now, if you're like me, this doesn't mean much to you right off the bat, but we understand this to be basically the study of bombs and explosions, something that very explicitly falls under the umbrella of harmful military research. On the next slide, we will be able to see some of the more specific implications of the Shockwave Physics Lab. So we can move on to the next slide here, please. Thank you. The research in the Shockwave Physics Lab is funded by and bought by the Defense Research and Development Canada, U.S. Department of Defense, and other military manufacturers. The explosive research done in this lab is actually part of research towards thermobaric explosives used in the conflicts listed on this slide as well. So as we can see, there's a really direct line from the Shockwave Physics Lab to harmful impacts of militarism across the world. Additionally, as McGill students, it's important to contextualize the lab by seeing exactly where it's located at McGill, right in the basement of McDonald Engineering. So as we move on to the next lab, which is the Computational Fluid Dynamics Lab on the next slide, we can see an example of a lab that has a little bit less explicit connection to the military-industrial complex. The Computational Fluid Dynamics Laboratory is also in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and specializes in the development of complex 3D modeling software for use by the aerospace industry and arms manufacturers such as Lockheed Martin and Bell Helicopter. Over the last year, they've also been working on technology for enhancing the performance of military planes and jets. If we move on to the next slide, we can see some of the direct implications of the CFD lab across the world. Next slide, please. Importantly, the CFD lab, as I mentioned before, does not directly create weapons. However, the CFD lab's role in the military-industrial complex and various connections to other companies such as Lockheed Martin and Bombardier demonstrate that the CFD lab is indeed connected to this larger apparatus and does impact technology such as military planes and jets that we know are doing horrible things around the globe. We are going to highlight two of the direct links between the CFD lab and the military-industrial complex. First, we know of a link between the CFD lab and Lockheed Martin for what almost certainly involves collaboration on something called the Falcon Project, a U.S. military project which seeks to develop a variety of hypersonic aircrafts to carry missiles and undertake surveillance. Another agreement between Bombardier and McGill University is noteworthy because the company was actually given the right to veto any application of the McGill research which might work against their corporate interests. So here we can see a key example of what Annika was mentioning earlier, in which corporate interests have had a really, in our opinion, harmful effect on McGill's research apparatus and has involved McGill in harmful technologies and harmful implications across the globe. Additionally, the information that we have about these companies is limited, and there's a real lack of transparency between McGill and the student and general community. The information that we have about McGill's military research is from something called an Access to Information Request, otherwise known as an ATI. These documents were released only as requested after multiple years by previous campaigns, and as we can see in the next slide, please, are heavily redacted and withhold many times financial information. So, and this I just wanted to mention is because of McGill's involvement and because of third-party companies that have redacted certain information so that we don't have a complete picture of McGill's harmful military research, only bits and pieces. This is why, especially with the CFD lab, we've had to focus on researching the private companies because oftentimes this is the only piece of the puzzle that we've had access to. This is also why we've been discussing nuclear weapons, because it's easier to see the effects of nuclear weapons around the world because there's more research available. Part of the reason that we are going to be putting forth the policy that we are going to be promoting is because we believe in greater transparency and a more ethical research apparatus here at McGill. We're actually going to be skipping through the next 3 slides, but you will have access to this afterwards. These just highlight the 3 companies that we've mentioned thus far. Now we have a quick slide on peace activism at McGill, again, for further context on how this policy fits into the bigger picture. In the 1970s, McGill was actually the only Canadian university to appear in the CIA fact book as a site of anti-war unrest during the height of anti-Vietnam War activism. So as you can see, we are on a strong foundation of peace activism here at McGill, and we want to be an important part of this story here. In 2009, there were a couple steps back that were taken on regulations for a more transparent McGill's military research. In 2015, however, as a part of resurgence after this, Demilitarize McGill passed the policy for a campus free from harmful military technology. Now, since this policy's expiration this past spring, us, SPD, is developing and improving this policy so that the McGill community can continue to make strides towards transparency and ethical research, not away from it. If we move on to the next slide, we will see SPD's main goal that we are promoting with this policy, which is to advocate for transparent and ethical research on campus, in addition to creating a space for educational discussion about peace and disarmament and being active in allyship of other groups on campus whose values align and intersect with ours. We believe that the policy that we will be promoting and bringing to Legislative Council is a really important step towards a more transparent and ethical research sphere on campus. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening today. Of course, we are really happy to answer any questions. And yeah, this is a really heavy topic, and we hope that Legislative Council can be a part of this movement towards a more transparent and ethical research situation on campus. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions on the report, on the presentation? My apologies. Councillor Wan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the 3 speakers from the SPD for presenting to us today. I just wanted to ask, I noticed on your timeline, back in 2012, Demilitarize McGill was founded. I want to ask if the SPD has any direct ties to that group, or if you're a completely distinct organization. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I can start answering it, and then if any of my fellow members of SPD have anything to add on, they can, of course, do that. That's a really important question. We are indeed a separate independent campaign from Demilitarize McGill. However, a lot of our research has been on the foundations of Demilitarize McGill's research. This is because, as I noted very briefly in the presentation, the policy in 2015 that was brought forth by Demilitarize McGill was the result of years and years and years of research. So we at SPD have been building on this simply because we're only 2 years old and we haven't had the chance to really build up that research foundation from scratch. So we have relied on Demilitarize McGill's research, especially for research on financial ties between McGill and the military-industrial complex. I do want to reiterate that we do have distinct goals from Demilitarize McGill. We are focused a little bit more on transparency and ethical research rather than, correct me if I'm wrong, other members of SPD, but Demilitarize McGill was more focused on abolition in general, which we are not focused on. We're more focused on the short-term goals in this case, which would be to create a space for discussion about demilitarization and advocating for transparent and ethical research through policies such as the one that we're bringing forth in the next couple weeks. I'll leave the floor open to my fellow members.
I think you summed it up really well, Maya. Just adding on to that, Students for Peace and Disarmament also have projects outside of advocating for transparent and ethical research at McGill. We've also done campaigning about the fighter jet deal that Annika spoke about in Canada, and advocate for disarmament internationally and nationally as well.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Wan?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks for the response to my first question. I have another question that's more out of curiosity. So I've noted that the two examples that you provided in your presentation of labs that have conducted military research were both in the Faculty of Engineering. Have there been any other labs or research groups in other faculties that you've found that participate in military research, or has it only been the Faculty of Engineering? Thank you.
That's a really excellent question. So these are two of the labs that we've done the most research on and feel comfortable talking about. There have also been in 2011 to 2015, in that date range, there was a lab in the Department of Psychology, and as well as there have been labs in the Department of Science. If you shoot us an email, we could, or shoot us an email or message us on Facebook, or if you just want to engage in further dialogue after, I'd be happy to share the info. I feel less comfortable talking about it ad-libbed without my notes because we haven't done in-depth research on those labs.
All right, thank you very much. Next, VP Frizzle.
Oh, yeah, this unfortunately is not a question. I really appreciate all the information you've given. I did want to note that particularly McGill's Department of Chemistry has been very active, or was very active, especially in the World War era in terms of chemical warfare. I don't know if any of their projects are still have military applications, but there is a pretty long history between McGill's chemistry department and chemical warfare applications, especially Otto Mass himself is the head of Canada's Directorate of Chemical Warfare.
Just to add quickly, if you go back to the Cold War, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of MK Ultra, but a lot of MK Ultra experiments were conducted at McGill as well. So that was the CIA Cold War quote unquote mind control experiments.
And adding on to that briefly, a lot of the information we have is only up to or is from access to information requests is up to 2015, and then other information just from McGill, like what we found on McGill websites or on the websites of the companies that fund this research. But we filed an ATI in June and then another one in September. It took Demilitarize McGill 4 years to get a response from their ATI. So we're currently undergoing an ongoing process of trying to get more up-to-date information on the labs that do exist and the labs that have ties with the companies we mentioned in this presentation. But it's a long process. But we are grateful for the support of we'll be grateful for the support from Legislative Council.
Yeah, and just also that, to be frank, McGill is not very willing to give up this information. So it is very difficult to get ATIs filed and to get them approved. So I think we at SPD all believe definitely that the support of SPU and Legislative Council will be definitely very beneficial to getting a lot of our research moved forward and getting it caught up more post-2015.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Senator Daryanani and then VP University Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your presentation. I do support your work and would urge other members of Legislative Council to do the same. I was just wondering, how would you like to seek support? Would it be through a straw poll? Do you have a motion coming up? I may have missed that. If I did, I'm sorry.
That's a great question. Thank you. We will be bringing forth a policy, I believe, at the next Legislative Council that will be in support of ethical research on McGill's campus, and we'll have a pretty in-depth context section, which is also why we wanted to include context in this presentation. But that policy will be brought forth to Legislative Council in the coming weeks, which will be our main point of action. But of course, we'd love to have you involved in other ways as well. And the best way to do that would be to like us on Facebook, as everyone would say. But that is our main ask to Legislative Council, is that policy coming up in the next 2 weeks.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to VP University Affairs.
I'm sorry, this isn't a question, it's another fun fact, but the Canadian government actually tried to kick MK Ultra off of McGill campus and like out of Canada, but the chair of McGill's psychiatry department at the time like protested and essentially prevented the Canadian government from removing the CIA from McGill. So hypothetically, MK Ultra, like half of it wouldn't have happened if not for the former chair of McGill's psychiatry department. Just like McGill psychiatry in general has a storied past, but that's like most of science at McGill. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Reed.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question regarding the policy that existed on regulating military-related research funding on McGill campus that existed sort of from like the 70s to like the late 2000s, as I recall, and whether or not what SPD is looking for is sort of a direct restoration of that, which I believe was about like having research grant applications require a paragraph about the possible harmful implications, or if what they're looking for is something different.
I guess I'll jump in. That's a really great question. We've been reading criticisms by Demilitarized McGill. Maya, you might want to speak more on this after, of the policy that did exist. I think SPD is definitely in favor of something like that policy replacing it, perhaps an improved version. I know one of the criticisms was that the section that it included had professors speak about the ethics of their own research, which may be a conflict of interest. So we'd be very, very interested to, with the support of Legislative Council, supporting either a similar policy or a slightly improved policy like the one that did exist. But it's really wonderful that it sucks that it was taken down in 2008, but it's really wonderful that it did exist, because I think we were at the forefront of, we were one of the few universities that had a policy like that. And that was the argument for it to be taken down. But I think it would be a really amazing achievement to have another policy similar in place.
I also just wanted to emphasize, especially in the policy that we're working on creating right now, that we're going to put forth alongside the VP External for a proposal or a policy regarding harmful military research on campus. I just wanted to reiterate our support for finding new research opportunities, especially for students in STEM whose ability to get research funding and grants and experience in their undergraduate years will be impacted by divesting from the military interest. And so we do have, as a group, we have a strong support for finding new research opportunities to replace the ones that we're intending to do away with.
Yeah, adding on to that, I know that like as a STEM student, if I'm looking for a lab to get some experience in, I'm not searching who's funding that research, what the applications is. If I saw like shockwave physics in my first year, I'd be like, cool, wow, like leading research in physics done by McGill, awesome. So I think the transparency part is really important, because students in the faculties that are funded by the military industrial complex should know the implications of those research. And I think the lack of transparency is very problematic, and it's definitely for the students of those faculties. I think it's for the benefit of those students for there to be ethical praxis and greater transparency.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other individuals with questions at this time? All right, seeing none, thank you, Leah, Annika, and Maya for coming to speak to Legislative Council this evening.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
With that, we will move on to item 7C, our last guest speaker, and it's from Must Bus.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, councilors. My name is Alexis. I'm the presenter for Must Bus. And yeah, before we start, I'm just asking you to take a moment and reimagine McGill campus, where the scope of the student life is not limited to the campus in downtown Montreal, but where the location of student activities can be in Toronto, in New York, in Boston, in Quebec City. And that is the future for McGill that we'd like to propose here, which is why we are asking the council to consider our application to become an ISG affiliated with SMOO. So MustBus, just a little bit of a background about ourselves. MustBus stands for McGill Student Transport. So here's our future operation after the pandemic. We'll have direct weekend bus trips to Toronto, to New York, and Boston, Quebec. So this service will be on weekends and holidays. The service not only intended for students to use our service to spend more time with their loved ones, their friends and families, but most importantly, it's also be a valuable tool for our students to be able to attend job interviews, to look for work opportunities, to go on internships in other cities in and around Montreal. So it's really more than about fun. It's really about to empower our students to reach their potentials. And okay, next slide, please. What we're proposing is a 3.5, which is $3.50 per semester per student fee levy. That's the same amount of fee as the bus, the STM bus in Montreal, the single trip fare. And what we can get in exchange for the $3.50 fee levy is unlimited. We can travel to Toronto, New York City, Boston, Quebec City for as little as $19 each way for our students. So that is a deal for students. Next slide, please. And we ran our question on the previous fall referendum, and we received 85.7% approval rating from the SMOO student body, which is the highest approval rating of many SMOO services. And it going to show that our service is needed by the student body, and we have a high demand among the student population. And our service is exactly there to meet the demand of our student community. Next slide, please. So at this point, you may have a lot of questions. You might be asking why, because this sounds like, to be honest, it sounds like a ridiculous idea. Run buses to New York, run Toronto to Boston. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? What's the point of doing it? Next slide, please. So if you, as we all know, we're currently experiencing a climate emergency in Canada, and essentially it's a global problem. But if you look at data from Canadian government, you can see that the transportation sector is the second industry responsible for the most amount of carbon emissions, right after the oil and the gas industry. So it's very important for us to push for the oil and gas industry to divest, and to push for other institutions to follow suit as well. But it's also similarly important for us to transform the way we travel, because transportation is essentially responsible for roughly the same amount of carbon emissions as oil and gas industry. So why is that, like in Canada, we have such high proportions of transportation-related carbon emissions. That's because everybody is been flying around. Everyone is driving. If you're going to go to Toronto, you probably would choose to take an airplane. The same for New York, you need to fly, or you drive, or you ride share. So that is why we have such high figures in carbon emissions. You can also argue that because the freight transportation in Canada relies on diesel, the freight rail, for example, or the trucking industry. But unfortunately, we do not have control over the trucking industry, so we can only do what we can, which is to make the passenger transportation more ecologically responsible. Next slide, please. If you look at this this chart, which is from the BBC, I believe, you can see that the emission from different modes of transport and the domestic flight is actually the single most, I would say, carbon intensive mode of transport. You're generating upwards of 200 grams of carbon emissions per passenger per kilometer travel. So for a single trip to Toronto, you'll be generating a couple dozen kilograms of carbon emissions. And if you look at coach bus, which is intercity bus, it's actually the second most environmentally responsible way of transportation right after Eurostar, only 27 kilogram per passenger per kilometer travel, significantly lower than car, than rail, than flight. So you might be asking, so a bus, that sounds great. We have lower carbon emissions, but you're still running on diesel. You're still running on fossil fuel. So why not, let's have Eurostar, the high-speed rail. So Eurostar, they only have a 6 gram per passenger per kilometer travel in terms of carbon emissions. So Eurostar is the high-speed rail system in Europe. Well, unfortunately, we don't have the budget to build a high-speed rail to Toronto, which might cost upward of $6 billion. And we don't expect Smooth to have a $6 billion budget, which is why we do the next best thing, which is to have the coach bus. 27 grand, that's the best we can do. Next slide, please. And the other thing is that we also believe that affordable transportation is really about mobility justice. So what does it mean, mobility justice? It means that for someone who's coming from a more privileged background, they have the economic capability to travel as frequent as they wish. They can go to Toronto tomorrow. I say that after pandemic, of course, not right now. No one's traveling at this point. But after pandemic, they can go to Toronto whenever they want to. They can fly to New York or Dubai the next day, or London. They're like traveling, always traveling, and you follow their Instagram. You can see that they're doing it all the time. But that's because they're coming from usually families that are more, let's say, privileged than many others. And that's why if they have a job opportunity, if they have an internship in Toronto, they can go there to do that. But for many students at McGill who do not have the privilege to really just fly every month, they need to rely on carpooling or on ride sharing. So I'm really sure that many of you are familiar with either you have yourself tried ride sharing or your friends have done it. But the problem with ride sharing is that if you're ride sharing with strangers, it's not necessarily safe. And I myself have experienced ride sharing once with a stranger from, I found the person on Craigslist. So it was from Toronto to Montreal. And in the middle of the trip, the driver just started asking us our opinions on gun controls in Canada. He was talking about how the gun controls was, anyway, weird conversations happen a lot during those trips. And it's not necessarily a safe experience for many students who might be coming from marginalized backgrounds. And the other thing is that you can say, oh, I can carpool with my friends, but you'll be running out of friends pretty soon because you cannot ask friends to take you like every time you need to go somewhere, right? You have a limited number of friends. You don't have an unlimited supplies of them. If you have like 100 friends and they all have a car, that would be amazing. But most of us don't have 100 friends who have cars. All right. So, which is why the must bus is really about mobility justice, to give every student in McGill an equal shot to travel, whether it's for a job, for entertainment, or for connecting with their loved ones. You'll be able to travel affordably, and they can travel as frequently as they wish. Right. Next slide, please. So, the must bus is actually, we're not the first in our field. As a matter of fact, student-run transportation is already happening at Cornell University, at University of Waterloo, at UC Davis. So if you have friends who go to Waterloo, you might hear them talking about the bus that goes from Waterloo campus to Toronto. So that's entirely student-run, supported by the student government. So what we're doing here is a similar service. It's really not an outlandish idea. It's actually something other universities have been doing for quite some time. So the must bus is really simply to bring in the McGill University, a world-class university, on par with other peers who are also world-class university. Yeah. Right then. So that would conclude our presentation, and we'll start taking questions. We welcome any and all questions, comments. Yeah, you're also welcome to type them in the chat if you don't want, if you're, I see that you cannot type in the chat. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll begin with Councillor Bonin.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your presentation. My first question is, in the referendum, was it an opt-outable fee, or did you discuss the ability to opt out at all? Because I think that that would probably affect a lot of things, including the price, right? Let's say half the students opted out of the fee, it would kind of change the price per way and the overall funding that you got. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bonin. That was a wonderful question. So on the referendum, it was more of let's say, opinion poll. So what the information we got from the poll, from the referendum, was that we do have a strong demand among our student population for such a service. And as a matter of fact, we have communicated and engaged the student body in the process before we go and do the referendum. So on the AMA, which we did on Reddit, we explicitly informed the student body that we will be doing $3.50 fee levy. So yes. So even if we, let's say for this time, we mention a figure, the amount of the fee levy we'll be doing, and that would not change the fact that we still have let's say a high level of support among the students. I hope if that helps.
Right. Yeah. My question was really the opt-out ability of it. So if it would be opt-outable or not. But I also was just wanting to point out that when they do the carbon estimates on coach buses and stuff, it's important to think that it's per passenger, but it assumes a full bus. So we would have to obviously see how many people we think would use the bus every weekend. If we're talking about whether or not it's climate conscious to do so. I just think it's something to remember that they're assuming in those calculations a full bus or a relatively full bus. And if our bus wasn't as full, then.
Yes, to answer the another part of your question, this fee levy will be opt-outable. We believe that every student at McGill should have the freedom to choose. They should be able to decide whether to pay for the service or not. It's everyone has a right to do so, and we respect the right for students to opt out. And as for the carbon calculations, we strongly agree with you that there's more nuance to that than just a simple chart saying, "Oh, coach bus is the single best thing in the world." However, according to our calculations, we have more than 40,000 students at McGill, and a bus can. So it's actually very likely for our bus to fill up. So in this case, the carbon calculation will be quite accurate in our case. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Juan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and Alexis, for your presentation. I wanted to ask that if the must bus student fee passes, Will representatives from SMU or any other organizations that you consult with be offered seats on your board of directors to overlook the operations and the finances of your company? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wan. So we welcome all and any. So that question, so your question actually, it's a perfect one because it talks about accountability, right? And that's ISG. We understand that how important it is to uphold the highest level of integrity and accountability. So besides being a nonprofit organization registered with Quebec government, which means we're subject to government regulations, we're subject to audit by tax agency, by CRA, by Quebec, by Revenue Quebec. So, however, we're also welcome any level of oversight from SMU. We understand that being an ISG, which means the SMU is shielded from legal responsibility in a general sense. But we also welcome the SMU you're welcome to come and check our account anytime, literally. As a student service, we believe that the student leadership should, even though we're an ISG, that we're not directly part of SMU, but we still welcome that SMU can always come in and audit us, formally or informally.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to SMU President.
Thanks. So I had a question regarding the pricing scheme, because I think it was mentioned that it would be as low as $19 for the trip. And my question is just like in regards to, how many students actually end up paying the price? Because we've seen, if you look at Megabus advertising, you can get a ticket as low as $10, but those tickets very rarely exist in reality, and you often end up paying between above $50 per trip. So I'm just wondering, in relation to the advertising, do you actually expect it in reality to be $19? Is that a fixed rate? And if not, how high do you think it could go?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, President. So it's indeed a very unfortunate situation in Canada. We have two bus companies running essentially a duopoly controlling the entire intercity bus industry. We have Megabus, we have Greyhound, and that's it. We also have some other company like Orleans Express to Quebec, but that's an exception because they only operate in province. So for Megabus, the claim that they have a ticket price as low as $1, which is entirely a ripoff, because in reality, most passengers are actually paying upwards of $80 for a trip to Toronto, and so we really feel that we are actually outraged by the reality that in Canada, similar to the grocery store situation, where we have a few monopolistic industry controlling the entire sector. Now, enough about that. Let's address our question. So the $19 is not actually promotional pricing; it's the real pricing we are planning on to implement. And also, just to be clear, the $19 is not a base fare. Well, if you buy an airplane ticket from Air Canada, you need to pay $30 for the luggage. You need to pay taxes and all sorts of extra fees, right? We don't have that. We're a student-run service, and that's why we're here. We're really to serve our fellow students. We're not here to make money, and we can't legally. If we do that, we're going to get arrested. So for the $19, it includes every single fee on top of that. We will not charge extra tax because bus is technically zero rated in terms of a GST, so we don't have sales tax for international trips. But for trips to Toronto, we still have a 15% sales tax. And the upwards, let's say, according to our budget calculations, the $19 will be a realistic expectation for us to offer on the lower end. But on the higher end, I would say that you would not go upwards of $30. So $30 one way will be a maximum in terms of pricing. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you for the presentation. I just had, I guess, two short questions. First one was, I guess throughout the semesters, like the demand for traveling may vary once when the whole pandemic ends. So my question is like, how would you guys distribute those kind of demands? And then my second question is, throughout the year, like with these demands, there will be times where I guess like services may not be fully booked. Like how do you accommodate the changes throughout the semesters for the demands that the students need?
All right. Thank you, Councillor Lee. That was an excellent question. So according to our modeling, so we ran a calculation. We have teams working on that. The problem we might have with our capacity is not, let's say, we'll be running empty buses, but rather our service will be unable to meet the entirety of the demand, which means we expect the majority of our buses to be full, and which is why our service is actually flexible. In our agreement with the bus operators, we'll make sure that we can add extra buses to run the routes. So in that case, if we have an extra large number of students who want to travel and we don't have enough buses for them, they cannot get the tickets, we'll be able to add extra buses to the route to make sure that everyone will be able to travel, so that it won't end up like a Christmas travel. So you don't have to really be a hassle for you to book tickets. And it's also one other thing is that it's very important for us to really predict the demands of the travel. As for example, right before the final season, we would expect the demand to be a little bit lower than usual, and so that's all part of our agreement with bus operators, and we have modeling to reflect that. So to answer your question and to answer anyone else, if you have similar doubts, if you are a student, you will be able to get a ticket if you want to, and yeah, it's more complicated than that on our end because we have a lot of logistics. But if you're a student, that's all you need to know. You will be able to get a ticket if you want to. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And thank you so much, Alexis, for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. My question doesn't relate to actual kind of cost, but it relates to another point that you brought up in your presentation, which is that you'll be offering services to the United States. Now, for students who are Canadians and Americans, that's a very simple procedure. You can cross the border with just your passport. You don't need any other immigration restriction. There's no other immigration restrictions. You have the ability to stay for 180 days. That's a very fortunate part of being American and Canadian. But for many other international students, that's not the case. There are restrictions. I know entering Canada, you need electronic travel authorizations, you need visas. And the problem is that for students who might not know the restrictions, and for an organization like yourselves who would be working to transport students across the border, there could be fines. I know the United States fines, I just pulled up, it's $1,000 to $3,000 for any person who would be inadmissible to entering the United States, and Canada is the same thing. So my question is, how are you prepared to make sure that students who are able to cross an international border are able to do so?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Smith. That is a very important question. It is indeed a very unfortunate situation that the United States has one of the most, I would say, repressive immigration regulation anywhere in the world. And MusBus, actually, we are on the forefront of, let's say, I wouldn't say challenge the immigration enforcement because we cannot challenge, but we do not cooperate with the United States Customs and Border Protections. By that, which means we do not supply the information of our passengers to the U.S. Immigration authorities before arriving at the border crossing. So actually, we are very familiar with the immigration procedures. We have members on our team who well, let's say they're experts. They're not experts. They're more like students in this area, and we have a entire contingency for different scenarios. So to answer your questions, to avoid that the students who might inadvertently enter the United States without a proper travel documents, on our website through the booking system, will clearly indicate that you must possess certain, let's say, certain documentation before entering the United States. And before boarding the bus, we will personally remind each and every passenger to produce. But here's a but: we'll ask them to show they have the travel document, but we will not ask them to open it. We will not inspect it because we respect everybody's right to, let's say, to travel, and we do not condone immigration enforcement, which is why we will not see the content, but we will do visually inspect everyone to have necessary documentations in order that there won't be anything funny happening at the border. So that will avoid the situation which you just described. Let's say someone who does not have passport or visa accidentally went to the border and was unfortunately rejected by the U.S. That wouldn't happen. We also have a contingency plan. We also have partnership with taxi companies in the region. So in the very unlikely scenario, someone was rejected by the U.S. border, they will be able to return to Montreal safely.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to VP University Affairs.
Hello. First of all, thank you for your presentation, Alex. I really appreciate all the information you've been able to share, as well as your putting up with our endless questions. I know it can be intimidating, but I appreciate your taking the time. This is actually not a question, another comment, but I did want to, I guess, attest to the fact that MustBus has done consultation with student groups over the past 2 years. I know when I was a coordinator for Quinn McGill, they did some pretty extensive consultation with us over the span of a couple of weeks. And I know they've done the same with other student groups and services. Yes, so I mean, just as when I was a Quinn McGill coordinator and now as a SWIM executive, I do really wholeheartedly believe in what they're doing. So I did want to just back up a claim that had been made earlier and kind of share my thoughts. And I appreciate your giving me the time to do so. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Vice President Frizzle. So just to build on to that, MustBus actually started in 2019. So we did, so you're absolutely correct. We did a lot of consultation and a lot of engagement with the student population, different student groups on campus as early as 2019. So it was really a long-term project that we have been working on for really a long period of time. And we have, it's not just me, we have 8 people on our team working behind the scene. So yeah, there's a lot of preparation that goes in behind what you're seeing right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Karasik.
So I just wanted to kind of clarify because I'm a little confused myself about how this works. So is the plan to essentially subsidize travel through Greyhound and Megabus, or are you actually setting up your own distinct bus company?
Right. Thank you, Councillor. That is a very good question. We do not. So first of all, unfortunately, Greyhound, they have declared bankruptcy and they're no longer operating in Canada, which is regrettable. But we do not. We don't feel sorry for their departure, as nobody, unfortunately, nobody likes Greyhound. As for Megabus, so we will not be working alongside Megabus. We're actually starting our own bus operation that's entirely independent from, let's say, Megabus, who is the only player in town. We'll be working with licensed bus operators in Montreal and in New York, for example, in New Toronto, to operate the service. So we'll not be actually owning the vehicle or operating it. You'd be sort of to give you an example or a really bad one, it will be similar to the dynamics between, let's say the drive safe. You don't necessarily purchase a vehicle, but they have some sort of a leasing agreement with some sort of a car company. I'm not very familiar with how they operate, but that would be yeah. I hope that answers your questions.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to VP Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you so much, Alexis, for the presentation and answering all these questions. This is all very exciting. I just had a question. Do you have any financial estimates or documents as backup for the $3.50 and also for the ticket prices that you mentioned so that members of council and I can review it and look over it? And also, will there be any startup costs? And if so, what would those look like?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So we actually have a prepared finance estimate as part of our ISG application. So you'll be able to review it in details once you have received it. Actually, the ISG application has been submitted to VP Student Life. So you'll be available for the entire, I assume will be available for everyone on the council to review. I'm not very familiar with the smooth procedures, but I assume that you will have access to the document. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Reed.
Hi there. Thanks so much for the presentation, and sorry to be the billionth question. I love the idea of having such an affordable means of student transport, especially with what I just learned that Greyhound is no longer operating in Canada. So there goes my ticket down to the States for Thanksgiving. I'm wondering about the models you spoke about in terms of what the demand would be, because what this sounds like for, at least by my off the top of my head estimates, I'm sure you actually know this, but what would be a couple of dozen trips a semester if you think about all the different destinations and doing it on a weekend basis. I'm wondering if you can give us a bit more detail on how you came to numbers that suggested that you would actually be able to very consistently fill buses and actually sometimes even need more than one bus for a specific time.
Yeah. So as for the demand aspect, it's actually based on we literally we at McGill we have a student body that's larger than 40,000 students, and it's relatively easy to fill a bus which can contain up to 55 passengers at one time in one vehicle. So it's with our modeling, we have different modeling going on, and even in the worst case scenario, we will still be able to fill the bus. And you might be wondering, what modeling are we using? Can you give us a little bit of information on the modeling you're using? Yes. So essentially, it's a law of very large number, and it's also used widely in urban design and public transit. Let's say planning. It's that there's also induced demand and reduced demand. So if you run a bus, so the conclusion of those modeling is that if you run a bus, let's say one bus to Toronto every week, it's almost inevitably that the bus will going to be filling up, considering the fact that we have more than 40,000 students at McGill, and many of them have connection to Ontario. So it's entirely reasonable to really predict that we can find more than 55 students who are traveling to Toronto in a single week. And it's the same for Boston, it's the same for New York. We just have large student body, and it's going to happen. And in case where we have larger demand than we can handle, which is why we enter into flexible agreement with bus operators, you'll be able to add additional vehicles to our operation for any given week that we have a larger demand than expected, so that we are able to accommodate the, let's say, the growth or the reduction in demand in a very flexible manner. Hope that answer your question.
All right, thank you very, very much. We'll next go to Councillor Wan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have another question for you. Sorry for the onslaught of questions, but my next question is about your current operation. So how are you currently operating? Because right now you don't have a student fee to fund your operations. Is it based off of volunteers and or donations, or are you acquiring funds from another source? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wan. That is a very important question. How are we operating right now? Just like many other student services on campus, we are not operating at this point because apparently we cannot take passengers from McGill and take them to Toronto because COVID-19 is going on at this point. It would be very irresponsible for us to do that. And however, right before the pandemic, in 2020, we actually ran 2 trips, let's say pilot trips to New York, and they were all filled up very, let's say very rapidly, like right after we released the ticket sale and the bus was filled up. It was in late February and early March. It was also sort of a bad timing for a trip that goes to New York right before everything shut down. So yeah, that was our operation right before the quarantine last year, and our buses were indeed filled up. And so to answer your question in regards to how we're paying our staffers, so unlike many other student services on campus, we do believe in paying our staffers in a fair manner because we don't believe that it's ethical to ask students to contribute their time and just say, oh, you're a volunteer, you're working for free. That's not how we're going to operate. We will be fairly compensating all of our staffers, and that will be reflected in our budget, which is part of the ISD application, and you can read. And you'll be able to see that all our staffers are fairly compensated. At this point, we're not paying our staffers. We're not paying our executives well. For example, me, I'm an executive, but I'm not paid because we're currently not operating at this point. And we're not relying on external funding. We are entirely a student-run operation that is not affiliated with any other organization or corporation. So we're really just on our own. That is entirely relying on student funding. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to VP External.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, awesome. And yeah, thank you, Alexis, for the presentation and fielding all these questions. I think you're doing a really, really impressive job. And my question is just a follow-up from Councillor Wan's question, which is, so as you just mentioned, your kind of expectation is to be an entirely student-funded operation. Are you, or at least like that's kind of where this this organization is moving towards next? Is there a plan or are you considering trying to raise funds from other sources and not solely the Smooth students, but say like just within sort of social economy, like that within the social economy, like accessing funds from other organizations and other sources?
Yes, thank you, Vice President. That's very good question. So at this point, according to our budget, according to our finance estimate, the significant proportion will be coming from smooth funding through the fee levy, and the another portion will be coming from fare box recovery, which is through the ticket price we charge to our students for using the service. So that'll be the two main sources for revenue. And however, those two are not going to be the only source of revenue. We're also open to ideas such as social financing. By social financing, it means we can potentially go out and raise funds by, let's say, approaching nonprofit organizations who are specializing in mobility, just to get the funding, or you may not be able to get the funding. So even in the case where we are going out and asking for external funding from, let's say, nonprofit, they will only constitute, let's say, a smaller percentage of our budget, because our service requires that it runs in a very regular manner. We cannot risk to have our service, let's say, suspended for 1 week because we didn't raise enough fund for this week. And that's just not going to happen. We're going to guarantee that we have a bus running every week. And that is not just a promise. That's something we must have. We must have financial backing to make sure that the bus is running regularly. So yes, we're open to the idea, but that will be a smaller percentage of the total revenue in comparison to smooth funding. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to Councillor Krosick.
So another question. Again, thank you for taking all these questions. I'm sorry that I'm now going to be asking like two. But regardless, so you mentioned that there's the idea of the law of large numbers, and that you previously ran a bunch of proposed, well, you've ran a bunch of test trips that did manage to fill up. So I had kind of like a two-part question. First of all, are you planning on like running it every week? And if so, do you think there might be a risk that people would over-focus on certain times and under-focus on others? And the second part is, in a hypothetical situation that you don't have a bus fill up, like you get like half of it, do you have a plan to make up revenue in that case?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Karasik. Those two are once again, I really love the questions. So the first part, to address it, let's say, part by part, you talk about how it's potentially possible that the bus would not fill up. Things happen, right? From what we have been seeing in the last year, 2020, we know that a lot of things can happen, even though we don't really think they will be able to happen, but they will happen. And if that's the case, in an extremely unlikely scenario where a bus does not fill up, the bus will still be running, because our budget, we actually have buffer in place to guarantee that the bus will still be running, even if it is not filled up, because our budget has the flexibility to accommodate this sort of let's say, a dark swan. I usually describe accidents, so I wouldn't use dark swan, but I would say, you get my point. So in that case, the bus will still be running because we have the financial capacity to do that. It's part of our budget. And the other part, I'm sorry, I have a terrible memory. Would you mind to remind me what the other part of your question is? Really sorry about that.
No problem. The other part was, if you're running, say, buses every single week, is there a risk that you might have people focus on certain times? Like you'll have like 4 buses worth of demand for 1 week, but then 2 weeks later, there might not even be 1 bus worth, kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Just like the previous response I gave, it is likely that, for example, right before the spring break, we'll see a spike in demand that we might need to have 4 or 5 buses running on one road. But let's say right before the final season, we might only have half a bus of a capacity in terms of student traveling. So that's entirely possible. However, let's say the goal of the survey is to really provide a constant and regular service that meets the student demand, no matter when that is, right? It's really similar to do walk safe or drive safe. They're not judging. They're not saying, oh, because we're right before final season, you should travel less. So we're not providing any surveys at this point. Our survey is here to serve our student bodies, not here to judge their travel needs. So we're always there. We're always there available for students to use our service to travel, whether it's right before spring break or right before final season. We don't ask why you're traveling. You can use our service for whichever purpose you see fit. And so you might be, so to answer your question, it's really not about directing students to encourage them to travel more at a certain time. It's really to respond to existing travel needs. I hope that then answered your question.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to Councillor Wan.
Thank you very much. So my next question is that currently the finance committee within SWU is preparing a report on student fees. So has MustBus consulted the finance committee so far? And if so, what has their opinion been on the eventual student fee by MustBus? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wan. That is a valid question. We actually have consulted the previous VP Finance, SMU VP Finance last year because the project really is going on for a prolonged period of time. And we received positive feedback from the previous VP Finance. In terms of for this class of Finance Committee, we haven't engaged them yet, but we'll be happy to start the process and engage in them. And as well, as I've said earlier, we have a very detailed budget that's part of our ISG application, and you will be able to have access to the document, which you'll be able to review in details. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We will next go to Councillor Reed.
I just had a question about the extent to which these sort of schedules will be accounting for travel time as its impact in terms of its impact on like feasibility. For instance, a weekend trip to New York might be a little bit more difficult to do if you, considering it's like a 7-hour drive, if you're leaving late on Friday and early on Sunday. But if you were to leave, say, earlier on Friday, you might cut into class time, but it might make going on such a trip a little bit more feasible. Is that kind of a consideration for MustBus, the possibility of sort of arranging the length or the scheduling of these trips to base in order to sort of increase or impact their feasibility for students to actually go on those trips, considering the travel times, and also possibly even maybe cutting into class time or going during the week? Or are they sort of intending on making sure that everybody can attend class and then go on a trip?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Reed. That is indeed a very good question. So as for our scheduling, it involves a lot of different factors. For example, the class time and the time needed for taking the trip. So for a trip to New York, which might take 6.5 hours, we usually for the last time we did it with we started the trip at 3 p.m. Friday in front of the service point, and we'll arrive in New York 10:30 p.m. So that's the schedule we had. It was a compromise because we could not, let's say, we want our students to arrive in New York as early as possible because nobody likes riding the subway at 1 a.m. That's not an ideal situation. But once again, we also understand that we have students who have classes on Friday. So it's really about making a compromise, and we'll try to reach a balance to see how we can proceed. That really reflects everyone's interest. Thank you for the question.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm going to raise a point of order.
Yep.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, but we have long since expended our time for guest speakers. We're actually bordering on the total expected time for this meeting. Just seeing as there's no actual decision happening on this topic, I would appreciate it if we could at some point soon move on to the actual business at hand. Not that I don't appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Alex, for answering our extensive.
All right, thank you very much, VP University Affairs. We will next go to VP External.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll just cede my time. It's fine.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Reed.
I'm so sorry. I forgot to put my hand down.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I promise I'll be very, very quick. This is a follow-up to my last question. You mentioned that as an organization, you wouldn't do information sharing with the United States government. I'd like to draw Council's attention to Chapter 49 of the United States Code, Section 44 909, which deals with passenger sharing. Section A, as it currently stands, requires the Secretary of Transport to ask the Secretary of Transport to require air carriers to provide passenger manifests, which include in subsection C names, dates, and passport numbers and visa information of passengers traveling to the States. As this currently stands, this only applies to air carriers. But if, the U.S. changed their regulations on this and applied it to passengers traveling by land, by bus, would this discount what you're basically providing for students going to the United States, saying you wouldn't share information in the States? And my second question is, you mentioned that you have students who are doing research into this. Have you consulted with any legal counsel, whether in Canada, in the United States, who is specific on transportation and immigration law? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So to address your question part by part, we're familiar with regulations in different jurisdictions. In Quebec, we're complying with the regulation that's carried out by the Commission de Transport du Québec. And in New York, we comply with the New York state regulations. New York City, we comply with New York City Department of Transportation, led by the mayor, de Blasio. We're also complying with the US DOT regulations carried out by the US Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FM. I forgot the abbreviations. Anyway, so our bus carriers, they're all licensed by Quebec regulators, by the Ontario regulator, by the US DOT, which means our operation is complying with all local, state, provincial, and federal regulations, and we're familiar with those procedures. And all our operation is complying with any with all levels of regulation. And as for the border crossing, currently, as it stands, the mandatory information sharing between the carrier and the CBP does not apply to bus carriers. So we are exempted from this rule, and we do not expect to see any change in this direction. But if it does, we'll respond accordingly. Unfortunately, I'm not a congressperson, so I don't really know how they're going to legislate. But if they're going to legislate, we're going to come up with an appropriate response that reflects our values, that reflects our commitment to a fair treatment of all travelers. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And last question goes to Council.
Thank you very much. My apologies for asking so many questions, and I promise my last one will be very quick. So my last question is, if Must Bus happens to dip into the red and stays in the red, financially speaking, will there be an expectation for SMU to contribute financially? Thank you.
No. No, that would not. First of all, that's very unlikely scenario. Even if it happens, we would not ask SMU for a financial handout. According to our assessment, actually, if you looked at our previous trip we ran to New York, those trips were entirely self-sufficient. So this SMU funding will actually be able to empower us to run this service regularly, and to prepare us for any potential, let's say, potential possibilities where we might not fill up the entire bus in the very rare scenarios. So that is very unlikely to happen, and which is why I would say we would not ask SMU for a financial handout in case of going to red, because that would not happen. Thank you.
All right, last question goes to Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I didn't really get an answer to my second question I asked in my last one, so I'll ask again. What legal consultation? You said that you have students who are doing research on this, but you can do research, all you want. That's not the same advice that you get from a lawyer. So my question is, what legal consultations have you had with lawyers, whether that be in Canada and the United States, who are specific to transport law and immigration law? Thank you.
Yes, we are working with lawyers, sort of our bus partners, and they have lawyers, and they are very expensive, but that's part of the cost. Yeah. And I mean, they have a lawyer to fill the paperwork. As much as I like to fill out personally, I would not be qualified to fill the paperwork. So which is why we have lawyers to do all the paperwork and potentially legwork. Thank you.
All right, with that, we will end the question period and we'll conclude this presentation. So thank you very much, Alexis, for coming to speak to the Legislative Council this evening.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right, moving on, we will move on to item 8, announcements. All individuals with announcements can raise their hand or indicate so via the speaking list. Councillor Smith.
I'm so sorry you all are hearing from me so much right now. I have an announcement on behalf of the Classic Students Association in the Faculty of Arts, and Madam Speaker, acting in your position as recording secretary, I sent it to you already, so don't worry about it. I write it down. So that's Hirundo, which is the McGill Undergraduate Journal of Classical Studies, is currently accepting submissions for its 2020-2021 edition. Papers coming from any discipline are eligible, provided they address a topic related to classical studies or anything dealing with the ancient Mediterranean. In the past, papers on art history, philosophy, economics, literature, philology, linguistics, history, and gender studies have been accepted. You can send your submissions as a Word document, preferably, and or inquiries to hirundo.history@gmail.com, and the deadline to submit is January 24th, 2021. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. We'll next go to VP External.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Just wanted to let everybody know that the record of votes from the second to the most recent Legislative Council are now uploaded on the website. They weren't before, but...
All right, thank you very much, VP External, and VP Student Life.
Yes, so I just wanted to mention that Activities Night is happening next week on January 21st and 22nd. It'll be the same URL as last Activities Night, the fall Activities Night. I encourage all folks to be there and check out all the clubs and services that we have to offer. Please spread the word if you can. Yeah, that's it for me.
All right, thank you very much, VP Student Life. Next, going on to question period. All individuals with questions can indicate so either by raise of hand or by speaking list. Seeing none, we will move on to item 10, Services Review Committee. VP Student Life, I just added this onto the agenda based on our email, so you can feel free to elaborate.
Okay, great. So from our last committee allocation meeting, there were no counselors allocated to the Services Review Committee, so I just wanted to ask if any counselors were interested in being part of it. If you are, please do just send me an email, and we can just randomly pick a counselor from the people who are interested. But it's really important that we do have a counselor sitting on this committee. Currently, it's a really small committee, and this year it's going to be a big undertaking to review all of them amongst this committee. So it'd be great if folks could just send me an email if you're interested. The Services Review Committee meets bi-weekly currently, and mainly the responsibility of the committee is to review all services and make sure that they're fulfilling their mandates. So that's pretty much my quick announcement about the SR.
Okay, I'm just going to note that there is going to have to be an amendment to that VP Student Life, just because since it is a committee allocation, it has to go through Legislative Council. So I preemptively prepared a motion to be passed this evening. So ideally, someone would put their name forward this evening. If not, we can postpone the motion to next Legislative Council. But I will ask right now, is there any individual willing to sit on the Services Review Committee? And you can just raise your hand on Zoom.
I can't find the raise hand button, but I would be willing to.
Okay. All right. So we have Councillor Awan. Is there any other individual interested?
I'm going to guess that I can't claim one of these seats.
No, you cannot. All right, with that, I will put Councillor Awan's name down on the motion, and then when it comes to recess and consent items, note I won't update the motion, but note that the motion would be passed with Hussein Awan's name within it. I will update it during the consent item, so if that changes anything, it will. But that is what the motivation for item 13G is. But that's it. So moving on to item 11, recess and consent items. Given that we also have approached the first 2 hours of our 10-minute Quebec Labor Code mandated recess, can someone extend our time to either be 10 or 15-minute recess? All right, thank you very much, VP University Affairs. I'll take Councillor Smith to second. I'll take it for 15 minutes. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, we will have a 15-minute recess beginning at 2011 and ending at 2026.
Is the consent forum open for anyone?
No.
Okay, I will check. Okay, try and refresh now.
I seem to be getting an untitled question as the
Just click the yes and go right through. It's fine after you go through that one.
Right, thank you.
Just a reminder that we haven't hit quorum yet on consent vote, and for everyone to please vote on the consent items at this time. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Legislative Council 2027. At this time, I'll close the consent vote. I'm pleased to say that 3 out of the 4 items passed by consent vote this evening. They were the motion regarding the renewal of the Indigenous Solidarity Policy, the motion regarding the amendment to the standing rules for the 2020 to 2021 Legislative Council, and the motion regarding Legislative Council committee allocations. So on that one, Councillor Awan, you will now be a member of the Services Review Committee. Parliamentarian, I'll just note for you, for your record keeping, that the amount of votes total was 25. So when indicating that in the individual voting, individual motion forms. With that, there was only one item that didn't pass by consent, and it was the motion regarding the Vice President Sustainability and Operations position 2021-01-14. So that one will come to Legislative Council this evening for question period, debate, and voting period. With that, we will move on to item 11, and it is the accountability report. I'm just going to pull it up. I will most likely need an extension on my time, but I will try do it accordingly. I'm just going to get my clock up. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm here to present the report of the accountability survey that, as you all know, was conducted over the winter break. So for the purpose of this, I, as in serving in my position as speaker, am also one of the co-chairs of the committee. The parliamentarian Wing Wong serves the other co-chair. We have 1 director and we have 5 members at large, as well as the University Affairs Secretary General. So as you know, this process was adopted by the Accountability Committee in developing the Fall 2020 Accountability Survey. The survey is something that happens at least annually. So we worked this on 5 principles: equity, constructiveness, fair assessment, quantitative assessment, and qualitative assessment. On quantitative assessment, we referred back to the 2018, 2019, and the 2019 and 2020 accountability surveys and proceeded to adjust our set of dimensions necessary. And so working under this, we decided on the relevant dimensions, as you all know: availability and approachability in office hours for executive, responsiveness to questions and requests for executives, fulfillment of mandate and platform for executives, participation during council for councillors. This is for councillors only. Constructiveness during council, this is common. Conduct in respect for elected office, that was for executives. Conduct during meetings for councillors. And lastly, we have the effort to speak French, which was for executives only. Moving on to item 3, changes from the 2019 to 2020 accountability survey. There were quite a few changes. Firstly, this was conducted completely virtually for this year, as opposed to both paper and digitally copies in years past, obviously due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time in a couple of years, we also granted councillors and executives the opportunity to submit qualitative feedback in cases in which the dimensions that we provided failed to capture relevant perspectives and information, or if any councillors had any other relevant comments. To note, in the past, the committee in 2018-2019 followed a similar structure, offering the ability to provide qualitative feedback for executives only. But this time we expanded that to the 2020 for the 2020 to 2021 presentation, giving individuals an opportunity to also provide qualitative feedback to councillors/council at large as well, which is, at least in the recent history, something that is largely new. The scoring system reverted to the 10-point system as opposed to utilizing the McGill grading system in determining performance. So previously, if you go back into the Legislative Council folder, you would note that the grades that were given were before on an F to an A scale, though we understand people are familiar with this given that they are students at McGill. We deemed that this wasn't exactly representative of their score, especially, like, for example, an A can represent an 84%. It can also represent a 95. There's just very different nuances between it, and we thought that it was better reflected through a 10-point system. As well, executive performance is no longer simply averaged as a whole. So this is something that you'll notice going in this report, is that previously the report and the survey received regarding the performance of executives was all averaged, and so it would simply have an average of the report of the performance of the executives as a whole. The Accountability Committee met this year and decided that we wanted to encourage increased transparency and accountability to the Legislative Council, because we know that this has been a concern from students asked. So with this, we are going to be highlighting each executive's performance individually in public session, as well as generalized comments. So for methodology, the surveys followed the following procedure. So we distributed the accountability survey, distributed the surveys in both instructions in both English and French. As you know, all survey highest, followed by optional qualitative feedback opportunities. Once again, this took place primarily over winter break to ensure that counselors had an adequate amount of time and to ensure that survey results remained accurate and thoughtful. We changed this in years because in years past, they used to be conducted over 1 15-minute break during council. We thought that wasn't enough time, and we noticed during the data collection last year that many people simply put all zeros or all 10s because they didn't care or they just didn't have enough time. And so we just wanted to provide counselors an extended opportunity to provide relevant information. As is typical, all completed surveys were then anonymized. The only time that they weren't was when I drew and delete survey results if, for example, a counselor graded themselves when they weren't supposed to. Following that, all feedback was averaged to represent the mean score of each counselor on each given dimension. Given misunderstandings of the scale system, this was more so prevalent last year, but it still happened a few times this year. Mainly believing there were some counselors that seemed to believe that the scoring was based on a 1 to 5 scale as opposed to a 0 to 10 scale. The responses from certain counselors were noted and omitted to prevent any statistical misconceptions or the presence of statistical outliers. I did ask all counselors. I did make note to the counselors that had submitted with this on the basis of the 1 to 5 scale beforehand. Moving on to learnings for improvements and next steps. Though instructions for, as you know, instructions for completing the survey were clearly communicated to you all, there nevertheless seemed to be an appearance of a disregard for some of the portions of the instructions, noting that numerous counselors continued to provide feedback for themselves, regardless of the noted fact that the instructions clearly stated not to. Furthermore, though the committee had distributed the survey at the beginning of the winter break as to allow counselors an extended portion of time to complete the survey, we noticed that there was still there's still a trend of rushing the survey, and it nevertheless continued, with some counselors picking 10 or 0 on every single dimension for every single counselor, seemingly without merit for all of them. Going forward, the Accountability Committee should further instill the importance of the survey to counselors, and the counselors should be mindful that their disregard for accurate scoring reflects both poorly on them, as well as misrepresents the performance of their fellow counselors. As well, though in years past, this is officially, this will be coming for notice of motion this evening, but though in years past, the survey has been completed twice per year, once per semester. As a result of hopeful recent amendments to the committee's term of reference, the Accountability Committee will hopefully soon be conducting the survey once per Legislative Council year. It continues to be conducted over winter break, once again with the survey results being presented at the first Legislative Council of the winter semester. And as I said, you know the reasons why winter break has been chosen. As well, presentation at the first Legislative Council session of the winter semester provides counselors a sufficient amount of time to reflect on their performance as well as improve if they choose to do so. As well, though there were some issues, we still recommend continuing the practice of conducting the survey over winter break. I understood that not everyone checked their SMU emails over winter break, but this is by far the best facilitation of the accountability survey that we've had in some time. And as well, we did remarkably well in acclimating to the COVID-19 pandemic, being instituted in a fully digital form. Going forward, unless otherwise specified by an individual's technological constraints, we recommend that the survey continue to operate completely digitally as a means of reducing the burden of manually inputting scores, as well as ensuring that form papers are not misplaced. And lastly, this was a recommendation from last year's accountability survey, but it will continue. So though such a dimension was unfeasible this year, it is recommended that the 2021 to the 2022 Accountability Committee consider revising the dimension regarding conduct to also include specific items such as behavior during the live stream, behavior during guest speakers, and other similar items to ensure that scores are better reflective of reality. And as you know, the inclusion of opportunities for qualitative feedback was included for the survey for both executives and counselors. And regarding next steps, the full report, including counselor scores, will be presented to the individual counselor scores, will be presented to the board of directors in confidential session. I will note that following the presentation of this report, all counselors will receive an email from me detailing your individual scores. So we will begin with item 6, results. Firstly, we will begin with the executives. On availability / approachability in office hours, they received an 8.8. Responsiveness to questions or requests, they received an 8.5. Fulfillment of mandate platform, an 8.6. Constructiveness, an 8.1. A conduct in / respected for elected office, 8.8. An effort to speak French was a 7. Next, we have 6.2. We're moving on to individual executives. We have first off, Jamark, SMU president. For availability, he received an 8.7. Responsiveness, an 8.3. Fulfillment of mandate platforms. There was an encouragement to speak more French in council. I will note that SMU president did, however, still receive an 8.0 in that area. As well, consider it towards all councillors, including those that have differing opinions from him. It is apparent that President Earl cares deeply about doing his job well, reflected in the fulfillment of his mandate. As well, lastly, President Earl could benefit councillors and executives by playing a more active and assertive role in describing, substantiating, and when needed, defending the actions taken by the Executive Council. Moving on to item 6.3, we have the VP Student Life, Maheen. On availability and approachability, we have an 8.6. Fulfillment of mandate platform, we have an 8.8. Constructiveness during Legislative Council, we have an 8.3. Conduct for elected office, we have an 8.9. An effort to speak French, we have a 6.7. For comments and concerns, we note that she's respectful during meetings, great and eloquent in her answers, and very kind and respectful to all councillors. For the VP of Finance, availability and approachability in office hours was an 8.9. Responsiveness to questions and requests is a 9. Fulfillment of mandate platform, an 8.8. And constructiveness during LC, an 8.6. Conduct and respect for elected office, a 9. An effort to speak French during meetings, a 6.3. For qualitative comments and concerns, very approachable and knowledgeable in his position, takes the position of VP Finance seriously, exceptional in his role as VP Finance, respected by all, and should control in council, as the position of the VP Finance can give a lot of insight into determining the best course of action for SMU on many issues, and Legislative Council could benefit from VP Marple's eloquence and knowledgeability. Next, we have the results from for the VP External. Availability in office hours, an 8.2. Responsiveness is a 7.7. Fulfillment of mandate platform is an 8. Constructiveness during Legislative Council is a 7.5. Conduct in and respect for elected office is an 8.9. An effort to speak French during meetings, we have a 7. On qualitative comments or concerns, we have very professional. Noted there was a lack of urgency and conciseness in delivering information, noting that it could hinder constructiveness and responsiveness grades. VP Ogunremi could benefit from working on speaking more concisely during Legislative Council. Lastly, he participated consistently in discussion during the Legislative Council, providing thoughtful and thorough answers to questions. He's consistently done so not only regarding his own portfolio, but also in discussions pertaining to other executives and their portfolios, despite dedication to his teammates. Moving on to VP University Affairs, Brooklyn Frizzle. I'm just going to ask, can I have a 10-minute extension on my time? Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williamson. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, the 10-minute extension has been granted. Thank you very much. For VP University Affairs, availability and approachability received a 9.1. Responsiveness to questions and requests was a 9.2. Fulfillment of mandate was an 8.4. Constructiveness was an 8. Conduct and respect for elected office was an 8.1. And effort to speak French was a 7. Qualitative comments and concerns. I will go through these quickly. A pleasure to work with, eloquent in their responses, has shown a perceived willing agenda which can hinder time, has a very strong constitutional understanding. Very skilled in the position, looks out for various student groups that may otherwise be underrepresented in council, can consider making their interventions in council more concise as to limit the amount of times their statements are repeated, and are ensuring that their responses to those with opposing opinions are not perceived as potentially aggressive. This one is councillor specific, but VP Frizzle is by far the most engaged member of the SMU executive during SMU Legislative Council. However, there was a concern with the way the VP of University Affairs responded to the motion considering the clarification of an international position. It appeared that they seemed to reduce the experience of some Chinese students, which was even more concerning that at past legislative councils, Chinese gallery members had described experiencing racism and targeted harassment in the controversy stemming from the statement. Though sure it was not VP Frizzle's intention to reduce the lived experience of these students, these counselors nevertheless hope to see in the future. Lastly, we have defend their own views with patience and assertiveness while ultimately displaying a clear dedication to working towards compromise and effective solutions for all. For counselors, this is just an average score. Participation during meetings of the Legislative Council, we have a 6.6. Constructiveness of contributions during meetings of the Legislative Council, we have a 6.9. And conduct during meetings of the Legislative Council, we have an 8.3. Moving on to qualitative comments and concerns. Given the sensitive nature of numerous comments, as well as the fact that individual counselor feedback is just remain convention to remain private, no individualized comments will be revealed. However, I do have a couple of interventions to make. Firstly, I'd like to note to all of you that you should remain respectful to other counselors as well as the dais, both during meetings as well as on private chats during meetings or concerning the meetings. I also recommend that, I also encourage that all of you are mindful of the amount of time that you take to speak during council meetings as to better allow a more fruitful discussion that contains multiple diverse perspectives. As well, counselors should refrain from personal attacks or acts of perceived aggression towards their peers and the dais, and to conduct themselves respectfully and calmly during interventions. I'd also like to note that myself, the general manager, and the governance manager are available to speak to if you have any concerns or comments. This includes interpersonal issues related to Legislative Council. I also want to let you know that as representative from the Accountability Committee, the committee is available for you to potentially launch an accountability complaint if you choose to do so. I would like to say that I'm literally always available if you have any concerns with fellow council related. You are more than willing to reach out to me. I know I have typically a rule that you shouldn't reach out to me on Messenger regarding work. I will make an exception. If you have concerns, I really want to hear them. So wherever you best want to reach me is fine. I'm more than willing to hear anything, to take time to have a best for any one of you. And lastly, conclusion. So with that being concluded, we would like to thank, on behalf of myself, Wing, and the rest of the Accountability Committee, we'd like to thank you for your time and dedication for completing the 2020 Accountability Survey. And signed on behalf of the Accountability Committee, we have myself and Wing. With that, I will take questions. All individuals with questions can raise their hand at this time. Councillor Collins.
So I did see that that comments are going to remain private for individual councillors, but I was wondering if we could receive like our private comments privately or feedback privately, like over an email or something, if that we are curious about seeing how we scored for like self-improvement purposes. Thank you.
Yep. So what I'll do is there's a couple, I'm not sure. There's a couple that just due to the sensitive nature, I'm not sure I'm going to actually ask like SMU HR on how to deal with it, because I'm not sure if like letting you know, especially because some are positive, but some there's clear issues. And I'm not sure how we're going to proceed with that. But any time that like there was positive comments on the behavior, like I can speak like honestly and saying that a lot of you received positive comments on your performance. So I will be congratulating you on that during the email. But yeah, absolutely, I can do that. Are there any other individuals with questions at this time? All right, seeing none, once again, thank you everyone for listening to me, and thank you very much for filling out the survey. With that, we will move on to item 13, new business. We will note that many of these passed, but we will begin with notice of motion regarding this should say accountability. No, my apologies. No, this is correct. Notice of motion regarding accessibility policy and committee. VP University Affairs, you may motivate.
Thank you. Right. So I will keep it concise since we're not voting on it. But in all honesty, the first incarnation of the accessibility policy adopted in 2016 was pretty great, honestly. Like it was a pretty knockout policy. That being said, it was absolutely unenforceable. So alongside with some like general updates to kind of modernize the policy to like a relatively new context, because the context of accessibility on campus has evolved like very quickly, especially SMU's relationship with the USD, which also evolved quite quickly. So quite a few updates were necessary. But the majority of the updates actually center around expanding the mandate and enforceability of the policy to ensure that both executive officers and the society more generally can be held accountable for their mandates under the policy, which unfortunately was not possible in its first incarnation. In doing so, we've also set up the Office of the Accessibility Commissioner and Accessibility Committee, which is the second part of this, I guess, omnibus motion. Both positions dedicated to supporting accessibility in the society and ensuring accountability under the accessibility.
All right, thank you very much, VP University Affairs. Given that is a notice of motion, this will come back to Legislative Council for question period debate and voting at the next Legislative Council of 2021-01-28. Next, we will move on to item 13B, notice of motion regarding amendments to the nominating committee terms of reference.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I defer this to the parliamentarian as chair of the nominating committee?
And indeed, parliamentarian.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So this is just a quick motion, basically to amend the nominating committee terms of reference. So since the fall 2020 semester, the nominating committee has been de facto asked to amend interview guides for various positions that we nominate for. So that includes director, judicial board justice, and international student representative. And so I just wanted to make that clear in the actual text, and then other amendments are just minor grammatical changes. That's it.
All right, thank you very much, parliamentarian. Once again, this will come to the next Legislative Council to be debated, questioned, and voted upon. Next, we have item 13C, motion regarding amendments to Accountability Committee's terms of reference. Mr. President.
Yeah, can I defer to the speaker on this one?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. President. As indicated in the accountability survey previously, the committee would like to put forward a series of amendments to the existing terms of reference. These largely pertain to the role, to the amount of times that the survey should be conducted during a given year, as well as it seeks to clarify some apparent contradictions. So I'll note that currently in the committee terms of reference that it currently says that the survey should be conducted once in the summer, fall, and winter. First off, this makes little sense due to the fact that Legislative Council doesn't sit in the summer, as well as the fact that takes a lot of time for the survey to be conducted and completed. As well, the committee's purpose is not only to distribute and collect the survey results, as well as the fact that we've noticed that if you're doing one in the spring and you're presenting it at the last legislative council, which basically happened last year, it didn't really matter because councillors, there wasn't an opportunity to improve. And sure, they could see how they performed, but it wasn't actually very beneficial to the improvement of the operations of the Legislative Council. As well, the presentation of committee reports has been amended to the end of both semesters. We'll note that in item 1.3H, it says that there will be a committee. This is not section 1.3.H, but at one part during the terms of reference, it specifies that the accountability committee will report at the third legislative council of the winter semester, which makes no sense, especially considering that in section 1.3.H, it says that they would be reporting at the end of each semester. As well, we've also made putting forward the amendment that the accountability committee will report to the first legislative council session of the winter semester, what we did today, just to ensure that the survey is conducted and completed during McGill's winter break. As well, lastly, the condition that the accountability committee's report to the board of directors preceding legislative council will be hopefully removed. So with that, that's the end of those amendments, and this motion will come forward to the next legislative council session for debate, question period, and voting period. Next, we have one remaining item on the agenda, and it is the motion regarding the Vice President Sustainability and Operations position. So we have Councillor Smith to motivate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to make a joke and defer to myself as a member of the board of directors, but I won't do that. First off, I owe a thank you to Senator Parsons for all her hard work and allowing me to vent so much while writing this, and to the CGRC as well for their consultation on this. So one of the minute implications of the failure of Miller v. SMU and the result in Miller v. SMU, the failure of the special referendum, was the position of VP Sustainability and Operations was resurrected into the Constitution. We got rid of this position in 2018 due to the closure of the building, as well as some other kind of behind-the-scenes issues. And a motion was passed in 2019, which basically said we weren't going to elect the position. CGRC also moved to amend the last constitution, last changes to get rid of the position. The portfolio has been divided among the other executive portfolios and other portfolios within SMU. So the position basically doesn't exist. Problem is, because the constitution amendments are coming up at referendum, this position, which is going to be getting rid of, will be up for a vote unless we extend the provision, which was passed in 2019 at council. And yeah, I stand for question.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Smith. So with that, we will enter into question period. All individuals with questions can either raise their hand or indicate so via the speaking list. Seeing no questions, we will move on to debate. All individuals wishing to participate in debate can indicate so via the speaking list or by a raise of hand. Just going to note in my position as speaker going forward to remind consent vote, given that this did not pass by consent vote items, given that consent vote items are typically deemed to not be require debate or question period, we would encourage individuals to follow more carefully what they believe an item can be approved by unanimous consent is and what truly should remain on the agenda to be debated. But with that, seeing no individuals with wishing to participate in debate, we will move on to voting. So if individuals can just give me 1 minute to open the form. I'll just give All right, with that, I'll announce the closure of voting. The results are as follows. 28 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstentions. The motion has been approved. Moving on to the next item of the agenda. We will move on to item 14, executive reports. So we will begin with the report from SMU President.
Yeah. Give me a sec to pull it up on my screen as well. Sorry. Cool. So for meetings, there's just standing meetings with the governing documents researcher regarding, we're looking at other student unions and like different documents that they have going on. So for example, like an accountability measure for, or sorry, student code of conduct, like master plans, and that kind of thing. So we'll be having a report coming out towards the end of the semester regarding that. I'm really excited for that. Under advocacy and representation, Vice President of University Affairs, because this is going back from December, I think 8th or 3rd was our last Ledge Council, so some of these are old items, but the VP University Affairs and I had a meeting with the Dean of Students following up from the highly contentious Senate. He was just trying to get a better understanding of why students were, I guess, upset, as if that wasn't clear. Then there was also follow-up with Principal Forche, because her and Provost Manfredi made some pretty ignorant comments, in my opinion, about Workday. So we met to, I guess, talk about that. Board of Governors also met. The notable things from that were the announcement of the new Chancellor, John McCall-McBain, and reappointment of the Dean of Law. I note that one in particular because this is the first time, I think, in a really long time that a law dean has requested to be up for reappointment. Usually they serve one term and that's it. And then there was a special Senate meeting. Again, shout out to the Senate Caucus reps and VP University Affairs and the rest of the Senate Caucus for successfully advocating for the amended SU policy. And then, so again, with the Board of Governors, we're meeting to plan the student forum, which is going to occur on January 28th, I think is a Thursday, right before council. So I think we're going to be advertising that a bit more in the upcoming SMU listservs, but it's a chance for students to voice their concerns to the Board of Governors. There's going to be presentations from various groups. So if you are available, you should definitely attend. And then just standing meetings with the Senate Caucus. For sustainability, there's ongoing meetings with the Sustainability Commissioner, so we're hiring a new Sustainability Commissioner. I think we just concluded the interviews, so we should be choosing the candidate soon. There's also a sustainability course that's beginning in 2 weeks, which is modeled after one that started at Concordia. The link's there in case you want to check it out. It is free to all students. They're running an event on local food and healthy cooking with the Peer Alliance Health Week, which is going to happen 1 week from today, I believe, and then a panel on green energy on February 9th. And then there was a meeting for the McGill Advisory Council on Sustainability that was happening, but I also had 3 other meetings that were going at the time. So I can forward the report to anyone who's interested. For the 5-year plan, I'm just drafting the committee terms of reference, which I hope to bring to next council. I attended the finance committee meeting last week and other just regular meetings. So the Francophone Affairs Commissioner, Councillor Juan, and I met regarding some of the translation errors on the recent listservs. So we're going to be amending the Francophone Affairs Commissioner's job description so that she will have that responsibility as well. Interviewing for the Gertz bar manager position. We've chosen a candidate, so whenever Gertz is allowed to open, that person is there. And that's it. So it's pretty exciting there. I met with the actual people who are in charge of Workday. So if you know anyone who's still having Workday issues, tell them to send me an email and I can forward them directly to the staff who are in charge of Workday on McGill side. They've actually, like, those particular individuals have been really helpful, and I've heard good things from the people I've referred to them. The situation's been resolved. We've had meetings with Divest McGill about the presentation that they gave earlier today, so I won't talk too much on that. Over the holiday, I was able to meet with the SMU president from both 1989 and 1979, and they'd reached out to me. So our executive team is going to meet with the executive team from 1989 towards the end of January, so that's going to be really cool. And then the SMU president from 1979 is actually John McCall McBain, the new chancellor for McGill. So that was a wonderful conversation. He's mentioned that he's like an ally to students in his capacity as chancellors, and that he'll like help us push with like things like Divest on the Board of Governors. So in the next few years, I hope to see some big changes coming to McGill's stance on divestment. Then Principal Forche, Manfredi, PGSS section, and I think a rep from Mac Campus, I don't remember what their official title was, met just to, they wanted to notify us that they were releasing a statement that basically said their stance was not changing on academic freedom. And that was, I think that statement was released sometime in December. Then I met with a representative from Clay just to talk about how we can try to get first years more involved in things on campus. So I think they're putting together a sort of package that will be given out to first years at the start. And the Vice President of University Affairs and I met with the Deputy Provost as part of our standing meetings. And then I met with someone who is, it's not like a startup company, but they're in charge of some sort of company that is looking to provide rapid COVID testing on campus. And this is something I brought up with the administration back in August about the possibility, and they like shut down the idea, saying that it was like, the testing is government regulated. But this person seems to think otherwise and has also been in conversations with administration. And he said he would reach out to me towards the end of January once those conversations have concluded. So looking forward to that. And that is the end of my report.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. President. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move on. We will move on to item 13B, report of the Vice President, University Affairs.
Hello, everyone. First off, who likes the new visual identity? New logo and everything. Super excited for that. Thank you, SMU Comms team. Okay, so University Affairs and Research. The student rights researcher is preparing a second report, this one on COVID impact. There's a survey run through the end of the fall semester, and that report should be out in the coming weeks. Currently working with the mental health advocacy coordinator and really advocacy team to coordinate the release of their preliminary report and kind of coordinate their university-facing advocacy. Yeah, and that's been going well. So I checked in with all of the active special researchers. They're all doing well. There have been like a few delays, but that's not entirely unexpected for SMU research, especially just because they're independent student researchers, but they are still all going strong. And the preferred names use report is the closest to completion and should be out in the coming weeks. And I know it's not the first time I've said that, but I'm a little bit more confident this time. Senate activity, we approved an extended SU option, which is actually currently still active. I believe we have not hit the deadline yet. You can still select SU options for the fall term, which all to say our last trial was a success. The CSS met a couple of times. For those who don't know, I'm the co-chair and I'm leading the review of the terms of reference. So we're just conducting literature reviews right now. Steering committee met. Our next gender discussion is going to be on student experience, which is actually great. That's something that came out of a student initiative in the CSS. So it's going to be a pretty great dialogue, I expect. And the USAP working group is still meeting. Next Senate is next week. So Senate caucus met again, discussed the agenda and the planned smooth constitutional revisions. For equity and advocacy, Bacon is still going strong. We approved a preliminary report and are front runners, just waiting to hear back from the nominees to get consent to move forward. And the report will probably be brought to the next Legislative Council for discussion. For equity infrastructure, the Black Affairs Commissioner, is actively transitioning into their role. The Vice President's Student Life and External Affairs helped with the redrafting of the accessibility policy, which you all just saw as a notice of motion. And the hiring process of the Accessibility Commissioner is underway. Meeting with the Equity Commissioners biweekly to revise the equity policy, and I'm currently working with Career McGill and Hughes to hire the Gender and Sexuality Commissioners. For university advocacy, we released a couple open letters and a message of support for survivors of gendered and sexual violence. And then finally, for academic resources, the Library Improvement Fund is running a very significant surplus just due to COVID-related project cancellations. But we are still meeting with the library and we have still approved some funding allocations. All this to say, I highly encourage anyone who's interested in any kind of academic resource related project to submit applications during the next open application cycle, because we have a pretty substantial surplus and we are very eager to greenlight some projects. I think that is it for me. If anyone has questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And if not, it was nice speaking.
All right, thank you very much, VP University Affairs. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move on. We will move on to item 13C, the report of the VP Finance.
Thank you. So this is the report of the Vice President Finance for the period of December 4th through January 14th, 2021. So I'll start with general finances and accounting. So as you all know, the Finance Committee is conducting an investigation into smooth student fee policies. The report is essentially complete. I'm just making some minor changes with the Finance Commissioner, and it's also being reviewed by the board before being brought to council. And yesterday, we also consulted services one more time. The 2021-2022 budget is currently being worked on. So I'm working with the team on that. Right now, we're collecting departmental budgets from the department heads and compiling all of that information. And we're planning on having it done by mid to late February. The date is actually February 19th that we're planning on having next year's budget complete. Next section is finance website. So I'm currently drafting a finance website to consolidate all of SMOO's financial related information in one space. You'll be receiving more updates soon as I figure out how to navigate to WordPress. Then the Where's My Money Going document. So the winter 2021 documents are complete in both English and French. The SMOO website and McGill website. He had its first meeting of the semester on January 11th. We approved of 9 funding applications, which are being paid tomorrow. And if you look at the end of the report, I won't actually go through them, but you'll see all of the approved applications. And it's very exciting because this is the first time in recent memory that the payment timeline is less than a week. So for the status of funds, relative to other years, all the funds are still fairly underutilized. Tell people that you know to apply because, yeah, they're underutilized this year. Moving on to clubs and service finances. So for clubs, new resources. So the most recent lockdown is making things nearly impossible to distribute club resources. COVID's definitely not helping anything right now. So we're actually recommending that clubs hold off on applying for credit cards and instead use ACH payments to reimburse members. But with that being said, all outstanding resources are still being distributed in a COVID-friendly manner. And then for the fall 2020 club audit, the deadline is January 25th, 2021. And right now I'm fielding a few questions related to that from clubs, but overall it seems to be going well. For services, so I mentioned in the last report before the holiday that I'm working on a new position called the Service Finance Coordinator. Essentially, it will be extra support for services related to finance things. So interviews are being conducted late this week and early next week, and I'm hoping to have them hired by next week if everything goes well. And upon hiring the new position, I will let all the services know and kind of what that means for them. For service credit cards, so the active services from this past semester seem to be frequently using their credit cards, which is great. That means that it's helping them a decent amount. No major issues so far, and it's greatly reduced the number of check requests and purchase orders coming through without actually sacrificing any of SMOO's accountability or accounting standards, that should say accounting. For other things going on, so SPIN is holding its second virtual event on January 23rd. It is a Eurovision style event, and huge shout out to the committee members, also the counselors who sit on SPIN, and the internal logistics coordinator for their hard work. I will stand for questions.
Thank you very much, VP Finance. Are there any questions on the report? Seeing none, we will move on. We will move on to item 13D. The report from the Vice President, Student Life.
Thank you very much. So for my report, I'll begin with clubs. So for clubs, with regards to the Club Portal Committee, we received a demonstration from Aventus just the other day, and we're continuing to schedule demos from other providers. We have one on January 20th from Campus Labs, and we're also waiting on Terminal 4 and Campus Groups to provide their demonstrations. So as I mentioned before, Winter Activities Day is happening on the 21st and 22nd of January. The fall activities that happened. The first club committee meeting will happen next week. Our events committee, the SMOO events committee, or the SEC meetings are still happening weekly. And as of late, they've been shortened because we decided to postpone the grand opening of the building due to the lockdown that's happening currently. And so a lot of services are, conduct their service from the building because it's not open to students, like most students. We are also working through a list of clubs that are currently inactive, and I will follow up with them this semester to come up with a list that I can give to the next Julie, and hopefully that information can benefit the clubs for next year too. So for services, I'm continuing to do space agreements for all the services and the tenants in the building. I'm also going to hold meetings to touch base with all the services at the beginning of this year just to check in with them and see how they're doing. And also there are a lot of service fees that are up for renewal in the upcoming referendum. They come to be voted on. Regarding mental health, we had our mental health roundtable meeting on January 7th, and also the mental
2 minutes for motivation. VP University Affairs.
I guess this is a point of personal privilege